会場にお集まりの皆様。
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for waiting. We'd like to start the Asia International Grid Connection Study Group second report presentation symposium on towards the realization of international grid connection in Japan. I will be your MC this afternoon. From REI, I'm senior researcher Mika Kudo. In opening the program, we'd like to invite Mr. Teruyuki Ono, Executive Director of REI, to deliver opening remarks.
My name is Ono from REI. Despite this sweltering heat, thank you very much for attending the Asia International Grid Connection Study Group second report symposium. This study group got off to a start in July 2016, comprising membership from those who are engaged in electricity power business. The chair of the study group is Professor Oyama from Yokohama National University, and our institute, REI, serves as the secretariat. In April last year, we shared the experience of Europe in promoting international grid connections, and based on that, we published an interim report. In the second report that we're publishing this time, we took it a step further. We chose specific routes between Japan and Korea, Japan and Russia to install interconnectors. We also conducted construction cost estimation, as well as discussions as to the potential business model and legal frameworks. And the deputy chair of the study group, Professor Takahashi of Tsuru University, will be presenting the outline of the second report. And as a business, SoftBank Group is considering to promote a project for Asia in building international connectors between Asian countries. And from SoftBank Group, CEO Project Head, SB Energy Representative Director and President, Mr. Shigemoto Miwa will be speaking. And from KEPCO Korea, we have Mr. Park Kapo, who's head of Supergrid team and DG of Power System Planning Department. And from Sasagawa Peace Foundation, we have Mr. Nobuo Tanaka, the chairman. And from Russia, Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology, Dr. Andrei Churkin will be engaging in panel discussions to discuss the recent changes surrounding the energy situation in East Asia. And we will have multi-perspective discussions as to the significance of development of Asian interconnectors. At the beginning of this month, the Japanese government published Energy Basic Plan toward 2030. And for the first time, it mentioned interconnectors. It was a progress, but it just says that strategy to expand the use of renewable energy through utilization of interconnectors is still fraught with many problems for Japan. And starting from next month, a debate will start with respect to long-term low GHG emission development strategies to decide the future direction for climate change and energy policy toward 2050. And so in the international debate for long-term energy strategy, renewable energy is poised to play a central role in energy supply, and power interconnectors positioned as a crucial approach. So I hope the report that we have published this time and the symposium that we're organizing will play a role in expanding their perspectives for Japan's sustainable future. Thank you very much for your attendance once again.
We'd like to now move to the presentations. As for the CVs of those who will be presenting and the participants at the panel discussion, please turn to your handouts. The first presentation will be by Mr. Hiroshi Takahashi, Professor Tsuru University Vice Chair, Asia International Grid Connection Study Group. And the presentation will be on what the Asia International Grid Connection Study Group, a second report, has revealed the significance and prospects for realizing international grid connection between Japan and South Korea and Japan and Russia. Over to you, sir, Mr. Takahashi. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. My name is Takahashi from Matsuru University. For less than 10 years, I've been involved in regulatory reform of energy systems. In 2011, in books and so forth, I've talked about Asia Renewable Energy Community. This is just an idea which I floated, but connecting through the international grid and in East Asia, a renewable energy resource should be jointly developed. This is an idea which I launched once, and since then REI has been very helpful to me. And as Mr. Ono has mentioned, since 2 years ago, I've been participating in this study group since 2 years ago. So I would like to talk in the capacity of Vice Chair. I'd like to talk about the report for about 20 minutes, and after having done that, I'd like to add my comments. As mentioned earlier, the study group has, as chair, Mr. Ona of Yokohama National University. The first year was spent floating ideas. The international grid, we thought about the possibilities of that, and we centered our focus on Europe. And in the past 1 year, we've gone into more specifics about how realizable this is and where do we draw the line, or whether it's profitable or not. This cannot be a deficit running endeavor. So we've been running studies from that standpoint. And this is the second report which you have in full on the website. It's uploaded as well. The same report is uploaded as well. So please read from beginning to end. It's over 50 pages. And looking at the chapters, there are 4 chapters from 1 through 4. So it's very rich in content. And I cannot hope to introduce all of this in 20 minutes. I'd like to highlight some points, chapters 3 and 4. In particular, chapter 3, specifically Japan, Russia, Japan, and South Korea. Where do we lay the grid interconnectors, and what would be the construction cost? That is what chapter 3 is about. Now, as for chapter 4, it says the amount is about 500 billion or 200 billion. Is it recoverable? Is it profitable? And these are the 2 or 3 points which I should like to focus on to give my presentation. Firstly, chapter 3 in the report, Japan, Russia, Japan, South Korea construction route. Let me talk about that first. For the Japanese, the international interconnector doesn't exist yet. So where is it going to be laid may be a question that might come up on their mind. Sakhalin, specifically, it's 42 kilometers to Russia. Kyushu and Busan in South Korea is about a little over 200 kilometers. Maybe around that location is what you would imagine. Briefly, it's not simply about how near it is. Using this transmission line, what kind of business are we going to engage in? That perspective is very important. And table 2 here, Japan-Russia. If we talk about Japan-Russia, Far East Russia is such that there's a low-cost natural energy resources, and there's a lot of that. There are lots of hydropower stations along the Amur River, from what I hear, and in Sakhalin, there's a lot of wind power. And so newly developed wind power stations would be an idea which is being floated. So with regard to Japan-Russia, on the Russian side, this vast natural energy supply might be leveraged via Hokkaido to bring this to eastern Japan, to import that into eastern Japan. That is a conceivable scenario. On the other hand, Japan and South Korea, if we focus on Japan and Korea, Korea has a vast power market compared to Far East Russia. They don't have as much renewable energy, and the cost isn't as cheap. The situation and conditions are the same as in Japan, perhaps. On the other hand, the present government is pursuing post-nuclear, and so they're talking about increasing renewable energy, and they have plans to do that, I hear. In Japan, in Kyushu, we have solar power generation, a lot of renewable energy, which is being introduced. So compared to Japan, Russia, it's a sort of two-way trade process which can be done in the future. South Korea and China, to connect Korea and China and all the way to Mongolia as well. I understand that that's being talked about as well. Central Asia has low-cost natural energy power. And so via the Korean Peninsula, to bring that to Japan is another possibility. And it's a business, after all. So while bearing these scenarios in mind, specifically the marine cadastre and these things, we would have to consider the physical and geographical conditions must be borne in mind to think about where to lay the transmission lines. And the study group has discussed these. Now, specifically, where would it be? Japan, Russia. Starting with Japan, Russia. In the Sakhalin area, the south tip, it's about 40 kilometers between Japan and the southern tip of Sakhalin. On the other side, however, there's transmission lines and transformer power plants, and there are constraints in this regard. And Korsakov substation is further to the north, and so we've focused on this as a base point in Russia. On the other hand, what to do about the Japanese side? The easiest to understand is right here, Wakanai, to tie Korsakov substation with Wakanai. 161 kilometers would be the distance. And as you know, in the Tohoku region in Japan, the Hokkaido transmission lines are very small, very thin, and so there are constraints. So the 2 gigawatt international interconnectors are what we have in mind. So even if we bring the power back to Wakanai, it may not be transmittable after that. So another idea is to connect this to Ishikari, from Sakhalin to Ishikari directly. And then others would say, let's connect this all the way to Honshu. If it comes all the way to Kashiwazaki, TEPCO's trunk grid would be there. So we could tie this, bring the power over all the way over to Kashiwazaki. These are the 3 interconnected routes that we thought of. And if it comes all the way to Kashiwazaki, we could manage the rest. And then what about plan 2 and 3? We've thought about the routes after that. We've studied that. The white portion is domestic interconnector. And number 2, R2, on R2, it would come to Ishikari, and then it would make landfall. It would be connected to Hokkaido Electric Power Company's grid. And then after that, it is brought over to Kashiwazaki. The north interconnector is to be very small. So if having connected to the Hokkaido transmission to bring from Ishikari to Kashiwazaki, it's interregional. It would be interregional. And this yellow portion and the white lines are HVDC submarine transmission cables. And after we connected to Ishikari, the other route would be Fukushima, to bring this to Fukushima. That's another conceivable route. Fukushima 2 decommissioning has been decided recently. So if we bring the power to Fukushima, then there would be a very big transmission line to the metropolitan areas from Ishikari over the land to Tomakomai, and then using the submarine cable to connect it to Fukushima. That's another conceivable idea. And Wakanai, what has been connected to Wakanai? From Wakanai to Ishikari, to construct lines on land is another case that we've thought of. In the Tohoku region, there's a lot of wind there, but inter-regional transmission lines are a bit weak. So different operators are working to expand and reinforce. And if that happens, if we build this line, construct this line from Hokkaido to Tohoku, Hokkaido transmission lines could be used to bring power. And after having come to Ishikari, to bring this to Kashiwazaki using the submarine line. This yellow line, this R1, is just one line, one international grid to Kashiwazaki. The other three would be via Hokkaido to bring to Kashiwazaki or Fukushima. And so in all, there are 4 routes which we thought of. And all in all, if we add all of this together, the distance is 1,250 kilometers, around that much. If the international portion and the domestic portion, we've thought of 4 routes where there's a difference between international route and the domestic route. On the Japan-South Korea route, we've thought of this as well. The thinking is just about the same. You have K1 from Busan around here. There are transformer power stations and pylons to connect around Busan. And then on the Japanese side, there are 3 points of landfall which we thought of. One is Maizuru, to connect to Maizuru, and that's KEPCO's area. In Western Japan's largest demand area. That's KEPCO's demand area, to connect to that area. And we've wrote K1, 627 kilometers. Second is going to the Chugoku region, Matsue. There's a large nuclear power plant there, and to make landfall in Matsue. And Chugoku and Kansai areas are such that there is some space in terms of intergrid. There is some requirement for enhancement, but if you connect to Matsue, the rest is such that there is ample space to bring this to Kansai. That's K2. And K3, this is the shortest distance, bring to Imari from Busan. And then right here is 226 kilometers. Among the 3, it's the shortest distance. And after having come to Imari, what to do about that? What to do about 2 kilowatt? If it's 1 gigawatt, the existing line can be used to bring to Chugoku and Kansai. And what about the other 1 gigawatt from Oita to take this to Shikoku? These are things that we thought about. Presently, there is no interregional interconnector here, but between Oita and Ikata to create a new grid. It's about 70 kilometers is what we've calculated. So via Shikoku to Chugoku to Kansai regions, we could transmit power. That is what we thought of. That is with regard to Japan and South Korea, 3 routes in all. Now, assuming we've established these routes, what would be the cost? That is my next topic. This is such a busy slide. I'm sorry. For details, please refer to your reports. The main circuit configuration or the submarine cables, what kind of cables we'll be using, and AC-DC converters, what would be the specification? We considered overseas examples from overseas. This is domestic mainly, but domestic specifications and cost data has been borne in mind. It's a simulation. A construction unit cost has been set as a result of this. Technically, what was conceived as a valid has been set. The result is shown on this table. With regard to submarine cables, we've taken into consideration examples in Europe and UK, 293 million per kilometers, an AC/DC converter, 15.7 billion per unit. Now, on the domestic scene, with regard to overhead lines, 664 million per kilometers. Underground cables, it would be a little more expensive at 950 million per kilometer. So that was the amount, the value, and the unit price which we've set. And based on this, we've calculated what the construction cost would be for each of the routes. As a result, we've come up with this tables 9 and 10. Table 9 is Japan, Russia. And I said there were 4 earlier. From Sakhalin to Kashiwazaki. If we directly connected as an international interconnector, that would be the longest, 1,255 kilometers. It would be the longest in terms of distance, but in terms of numbers, 430.5 billion yen. It's the cheapest relatively, and the distance is about the same, but R3, that's 573 billion yen or so. The domestic portion unit price, as explained earlier, is more expensive. So if we add up, the distance is not much different, but the domestic portion is longer. The domestic interconnector is longer, and so therefore it's a little more expensive. With regard to Japan, Russia, it's about from 430 to 573 billion yen, and that's the number you can calculate. And as for Japan, South Korea, unlike Japan, Russia, Japan, South Korea is such that the distance is different. The longest is Busan Maizuru, which I mentioned earlier, to directly connect to Kansai, 627 kilometers. It's very long. The amount is very expensive, 246.5 billion yen. And if we look at this one here, K3, as an international interconnector, it's the shortest in terms of length and distance. The domestic portion, there is some of that because we're connecting to Shikoku. So if we add all this together, 212.3 billion yen is the amount that we get. So between Japan and South Korea, the overall distance is varied between the routes. But if we use one submarine cable, relatively the unit price becomes cheaper. So the amount is about 200 billion yen to 240 to 250 billion yen, which is the cost for these 3 routes. And so these were the routes and how much it would cost to lay cables on these 3 routes. Estimates were given. From here on, I'd like to talk about whether we're able to recover our investment. We know what the cost is. A year ago, when we came out with a report, international transmission had a lot of benefits. But if you ask whether it's profitable or whether the investment can be recovered, we would like to report on the results of our estimate. In U.S. or Europe, they have over 100 years of international grid connection, and how to recover the investment is something that they've are quite advanced in terms of how to work this out. So we've taken these previous examples, and there are 4 broadly business models for recovering investment. That was what the study group has sorted out. And as is shown here, there's the generators, suppliers, dedicated line model, regulated grid tariff model, and transmission rights sales model, and fourthly, the congestion change model. There are these 4 business models. All four of these are such that it's possible for Japan to choose any of these models. On the other hand, a power liberalization situation or the situation or whether we can couple both markets, these are such premises which we have to consider. So let me focus on two of these to explain. That's the generator supplier dedicated line model and the regulated grid tariff model. For the time being, for Japan to internationally connect grids, we believe that these are realizable models. The easiest to understand is
And number two is the easiest to understand regulated grid tariff model. That is what we think. At this moment in Japan, a wheeling fee or transmission fee is charged to recoup the investment cost for the lines. The basic thinking applies here. We're talking about interconnectors between Japan and overseas. So we're going to have a grid connection cable. And the transmitter would usually build the facility. And, of course, there's cost involved. It's not just construction cost. O&M, maintenance costs will also have to be incurred. And the business will be monopolized going forward. So investment will have to be recouped. And the total cost will have to be calculated. Alpha plus beta, yen per kilowatt hour, that is how it can be described. Between Japan and overseas, that will have to be worked out. And that needs to be shared. So the cost needs to be shared between the two. That is the thinking. So alpha will be added on to the wheeling cost for overseas. And beta is the extra that will be added to the wheeling cost. So part of distribution and transmission cost will have to be charged for the investment to be recouped. And on a yen per kilowatt hour, we will be recouping this cost from the users. So that is what this regulated grid tariff model is about. So under that model, is it really possible to recoup the investment? In other words, how much wheeling cost or grid tariff will have to be charged? And this is the result of the estimation. I'm sorry for the small print. It may be difficult for you to see, but Table 14 is for Japan, Russia. Table 15 is Japan, South Korea. So as far as Japan, Russia route is concerned, Kashiwazaki would be the best location in terms of cost. The part that's highlighted in red is where profit can be gained. So for the cheapest cost per kilowatt hour, 0.06 yen. And so it is good enough to recoup the cost. But when it becomes a little more expensive, profit may not necessarily be gained, but roughly 0.1 yen per kilowatt hour. With that grid tariff, I believe that profitability can be secured. Now, as far as Japan, South Korea is concerned, there are three routes that we considered. And the top one is the only one that's highlighted. What does that mean? In terms of the value of the cost, Busan-Maizuru route is the most expensive. And the wheeling costs or grid tariff will be divided by the number of consumers in the region. So the power users, the number, if it's greater, then the cost per consumer or the user would come down more. So K2 is to connect to Chugoku electricity power. And so the number of users there would be used for calculation. And K3 is connected to Kyushu. And of course, the benefit will spread to the whole of west of Japan, but the number of power users in Kyushu Electric's market will be used for calculation. And however, the top line is profitable because the number of users there, power users there, is the greatest. So that was about the regulated grid tariff model. Now, another representative investment RIKU model is the generator supplier dedicated line model. And this is something that we do not often hear, but in the study group discussion in autumn last year, we did a survey in North America. And the results of the survey done in North America is on our website. And we actually had a lot of learning there. And this is what the model is about. Between Canada and the United States. In Canada, there is abundance and surplus of renewables. So power generated from renewables in Canada could be sent to Massachusetts and New York. These states are importing cheaply from Canada, and that has become sort of a boom. And of course, it's part of the measures to mitigate climate change. So state governments in the United States are engaged in such projects. And so power generated from renewables, not only that, but they're also installing transmission lines. For example, in the province of Quebec or Labrador, where there is ample renewables. And when they're sent to Massachusetts, of course, transmission lines are necessary. So transmission business is also included. So it's not just the generation cost, but transmission cost. And inclusive of that, power is sold to Massachusetts, and revenue, of course, is generated. And so the revenue gained would pay for the cost of power generation as well as transmission. And that model is arising between Canada and the U.S. And we have called this generator suppliers dedicated line model. So from Russia to Japan, Japan is going to import energy from Russia. Russia is going to export. And so Russia will be selling power to Japan, and they will gain revenue out of that. And of course, they will use that revenue to pay for the cost of power generation as well as the cost of the interconnector between Russia and Japan. So that's the thinking behind this business model. And we did some estimation as to the profit. And there are 4 routes. 2 gigawatt interconnector. So if in the case of 1 gigawatt, what happens in the case of 2 gigawatt? FOB cost in Russia, how much should it be for profitability to be secured? In other words, how much need it be for the parts to be shaded? So 6 yen or below, and it seems that profitability will be secured. In all likelihood. Of course, when the cost rises, revenue will come down in Japan. Of course, competition will be harsher. So if Russia can supply cheaper cost of power, then it can be pretty profitable, inclusive of the cost of generation as well as cost of transmission. Russia can gain profitability. And we did the same for Japan, Korea. And the price of transmission line is cheaper between Japan and Korea compared to that between Japan and Russia. For Korea as well, 6 yen or partly 7 yen. At that level of FOB on the side of Korea, then inclusive of the cost of transmission, the cost needed for investment can be recouped. So those are the highlights of the report. I gave you a lot of numbers, and you may be wondering whether they are actually viable. And let me add some commentary from my side to explain further. Technically speaking, is it really feasible? Let me make some comments on that point. So the longest, Sakhalin and Kashiwazaki, that's the longest distance, 1,255 kilometers. There's no such transmission line in Japan, neither in the rest of the world. The longest is 580 kilometers for NorNed. So 1,255 kilometers, perhaps you may think it's too long, perhaps. But in Europe, ones that are longer than 580 kilometers, NorNed is being installed. IceLink, 1,720 kilometers, is being planned between Iceland and the UK. So technically speaking, lines extending over 1,000 kilometers are possible. And of course, 400, 500, 660, 27, 226 kilometers, they're not even planned yet. So given the technological advances going forward, the distance of 1,255 will no longer be a desktop exercise. And of course, the depth of the sea is going to be important as well, not just the distance. The maximum is 300 meters. That will be the maximum sea depth according to the route design. For example, in Italy, this is domestically for Italy. There's a SAPE transmission line, and the cable is laid at a depth of 1,600 meters. That is said to be the deepest in the world. So such a project already exists. Connecting Japan to Russia as well as to Korea, technically speaking, it is feasible given these numbers. Now, on the other hand, it may be technically feasible, but is it really going to be profitable? Is it going to make business sense? Just to verify that, the longest line, 430.5 billion, and between Busan and Maizuru, 246.5 billion, and other parts will be over 100 billion or so. And these are transmission lines within Japan, so they tend to be costlier, but somewhere between 100 billion to 400 billion. These are the results of the cost estimation. And can they be funded in terms of absolute amounts? Can they be accepted? 50 years ago, NorNed cost that came out rather low, and we did some interviews in North America, as I said. $2 billion US. That's the level of cost that we've heard in North America. So hundreds of billions of yen. In yen terms, of course, it depends on the capacity as well as the distance, but hundreds of billions of yen. That is the ballpark figure that we're looking at. So the numbers that we see here, although they vary in a range, but they're not on a whole different magnitude or digit. They're about the right ballpark figures. So 400 billion or so, can it be funded by Japan? Is it something that Japan can bear? Power utilities in Japan, for the whole of Japan, they're spending 1.8 trillion yen. In the past, they used to make investments around 3 trillion yen. In recent times, they have reduced their investment on the order of 1 to 2 trillion. But if we average the last 20 years, they have invested 1.8 trillion yen on average for power generation and transmission. 500 billion is the highest we're looking in a project. And if it's going to be depreciated over 25 years, it's 20 billion per year. So 1.8 trillion and 20 billion means 20 billion is 1% of 1.8 trillion. So if you can allocate 1% of what they're already investing per annum, then we will be able to fund this project. The unit cost, of course, is a problem. In Europe, we're seeing increasing number of interconnectors, and cable manufacturers are competing ever more harshly, and so the cost of transmission cable is coming down quite considerably. And we have found out that the connections domestically could be even more costly than interconnectors. That's one of the findings. And what to do about the cost, of course, needs to be discussed. FOB 6 yen per kilowatt hour. Renewables at that level have become general in the world. Wheeling cost or grid tariff, 7 yen per household is already paid. And it's 0.1 yen addition to that. Of course, it depends on the location of the project, the siting, but these are not unfeasible from how I see it. Well, then, is it really possible? Is it feasible? Well, other countries are involved, so we have to think about diplomacy. It's not going to be all that easy. But China, Korea, Russia, and Korea and Russia representatives will make their presentations. But actually, these countries are being very proactive in raising these ideas for interconnectors. And it's not just the power utilities who are talking about this. President Putin, President Moon, the national leaders, as part of their national policy, are promoting the idea of interconnections with Japan. They have been making such presentations and proposals in diplomatic circles. And I'm sure the majority of you are Japanese. Well, as Japanese, what is concerning, of course, is national security. It's the same for other countries as well. So you're going to rely on other countries for the supply of energy or electricity power. Can we do so? That is the greatest source of concern, national security. As a Japanese citizen, I do understand the concern, but we have to be calm about thinking about this. Interconnectors, why do they exist in the first place? That's for stable supply. They are to be built for the sake of stable supply. 2011 and onward, we have introduced OCCTO, cross-regional transmission of power for the sake of stable supply. And the ultimate form of that is interconnectors. So if there's shortage of supply of energy in Japan, once that happens, we can count on other countries to supply energy. Vice versa is also true. If there's shortage in other countries, Japan can help support them. So stable supply is at the crux of this. And of course, in international politics, there's interdependence of economy. Through trade and transaction, countries can collaborate with each other, and they will lead to a win-win relationship. So in East Asia, as Koreans, as Japanese, as Russians, we all want to make it better, make the situation in East Asia better, and this will contribute to this. And I think Europe's history was all about that, making the region stable. Well, theoretically speaking, that may be true, but is that going to be all that easy? And I run some estimates. 2 gigawatt interconnector. What is the significance of that? So what's going to be the impact in terms of national security? 151 gigawatt is the largest we have in Japan. So if we have a full capacity of 2 gigawatt interconnector, that's only 1% or so of the total. And even if utilization is 100%, 2 gigawatt is going to be only 1.8% of what we already have. So we already rely on Russia for 8% of our LNG. Considering that, is this going to be something negative? Is that going to be something positive? Rather, we have to be calm about thinking about this. And of course, the essence of national security is risk distribution, risk diversification. We are importing as primary energy from Russia and Middle East can be imported as secondary energy. In the case of power, we can send power to Russia as well as receive power from Russia, unlike primary energy of oil. Is this going to be a true national security threat, or is it going to be a plus, a positive? I think we have to be cool-headed in discussing this. And this is my last page. Well, so far, the Japanese government has been relatively cautious about this concept, of course, because of security concerns, and electricity system reform has just begun, and they may be wary of receiving cheaper power from overseas. But as Executive Director Ono said, the Japanese government finally started to say that this interconnector concept needs to be carefully examined. They're starting to say so. We're going to hear from Asian representatives as to their political commitments to these kinds of projects. But here in Japan, I hope with this symposium as an opportunity, we hope to take more concrete steps toward action, not just discussion. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Takahashi. Next, we have Mr. Shigeki Miwa, CEO, Project Office SoftBank Group, Representative Director and CEO, SB Energy Group, who will be delivering the next presentation. Please step up to the podium, Mr. Miwa. SoftBank's Renewable Energy Business and Asia Supergrid is the title of his presentation. So over to you, sir. Thank you very much. My name is Miwa from SoftBank's SB Energy Group. From REI, I've been given this very precious opportunity. But to what extent I can be, what I have to say would be useful is something that I had doubts about in front of this august audience. Maybe there are those who have been here the second or third time who have heard me, and there has been no major progress since I've spoken last on the part of SoftBank. Tangible events are lacking, and SoftBank doesn't feel things are progressing. So then why am I here once again to talk to you? The reason is because, on the other hand, the world's understanding of renewable energy has progressed remarkably. So I felt that that was the thing, the only thing I can talk about. KEPCO's representative will be speaking later, and from Skorzek, the Russian representative is here to give you a presentation as well. So I'd like to talk about SoftBank's and what we're doing in terms of renewable energy and the things that we're doing recently anew. And then you might ask why we're doing these things. There's SoftBank's business strategy, that's one thing, but the Asia Supergrid, from that perspective, I'd like to talk about why we're doing the things that we are doing and why we thought of doing these things. And the speech is public, is it? Or is it just for this room? Will it be made public later on? Oh, it will be made public later on. And then I will have to be careful about what I say. But you had, how do China and how do South Korea look at this issue? I'd like to refer to that as well. Perhaps you have seen this many times. SoftBank's 2011 March 11th, that's the Great Eastern Japan disaster. Since then, how we have gone into the energy business, that is our business. And the business domain has expanded largely. Communication business went into energy, and there is a lot of synergy between energy and communication, and there's that flow. And then regionally, we went to Mongolia, and then we went to India, and then we went to Saudi Arabia, and then later on we made inroads into Canada to invest in resources. On the 2nd of July, we went to Mauritania. There was a summit of the AU then. I went there with Mr. Son. As a private company, we're the first to be invited to the AU summit. And in a nutshell, we said we do photovoltaic power generation in Africa, and REI is doing very meaningful business. And I'm maybe sound like I am blowing my own horn, but because I'm a member, but it's Japan's most trustworthy entity with intelligence. And it's an entity that communicates about natural resources and airs comments and is instrumental to policy making. I truly feel that that is the kind of REI is. On the 8th of March, I was invited by REI, and I would like to refrain from talking about the same. Since then, we've seen some increase in Japan. This is SB Energy. And as you will be seeing later on, India is such that they're close to 4 gigawatts in 2 years. In 2 years, it's 4 gigawatts. Compared to that, in the case of SB Energy, in the case of Japan, we've worked hard for 7 years, but 650 megawatts is what we have realized. On the Japanese market, that might have been the size. But in terms of sites, in India, in just 3 provinces or states. There are maybe 5 to 6 projects. On the other hand, in Japan, our projects are small, but we have 43 sites. And 660 megawatts is what we have achieved. And we're collecting this vast amount of information. And we have panel makers that are not comparable to those of India. And we have relations with the EPCs in India. We have a lot, and we're doing this under various weather conditions, which is uncomparable to the situation in India. We do batteries as well. If you ask, is it natural energy? Precisely speaking, it isn't, but it's clean energy. Natural gas, we emit natural gas, and then we extract hydrogen to generate power. We've exceeded 10 megawatts. SoftBank is still working on this. People ask us, 10 megawatts has been exceeded finally. And a distributed clean energy foundation, I believe, finally has been built. And in Mongolia, in Gobi Desert, 50 megawatts wind energy power generation has been started. We've bought 3,670 square kilometers of land, and we're supplying to the high regions, and then 2 megawatt of development in Gobi Desert is what we're doing. And in addition to the 50 megawatts, we are conducting a study to do a 2 gigawatt development, a 750 megawatt wind power and solar power development is what we're studying at the moment. And as has been mentioned before, in AP and Rajasthan and Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, we've done 3.88 gigawatts. That's DC. Although it's not written here, this is direct current DC. In terms of AC, the number is smaller. It would be about 1.4 gigawatts or so. And in terms of number, India is growing its figures. It's a national policy which they're pursuing in a very forceful way. In Saudi Arabia, 200 gigawatts. When you hear the number 200 gigawatts, you might say, is this really true? But it's a vision. And as a vision, Son has concluded an MOU with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. The first project were ironing out the details with the authorities in Saudi Arabia toward realization in 2019. And I'm reasonably confident, I should say. This would be the world's largest one location solar power generation project, which I believe can be realized. We do solar, wind, and hybrid and fuel cell development. Internationally, we're also contributing to the renewable energy frameworks, one of which is ISA. And perhaps you are aware, this is the International Solar Alliance. And originally, Prime Minister Modi and France, President Macron, and Prime Minister Modi took the initiative. There was the Paris Convention, and to reduce CO2 meant more solar or natural energy development. And if it's solar, where would be the best location? Under the equator, between the north and south lines. Bring together all of the countries as one organization to do projects together. And that was 2017 in March, when they had the first General Assembly. Modi is the president, and Mr. Son, Mr. Modi is chairman, and Mr. Son is the corporate leader or chairman. between the North and South lines. All of the countries, if all of the countries get together, this would be all of the countries with solar resources, India and Africa and Middle East. That's 121 countries in this organization. We want to increase membership. And all of the countries in the UN, we feel, could participate. So we'll be soliciting more. And there are different agendas, political agendas, France and India. Creating an international solar alliance. Now that would be in contrast to the OBOR of China, One Belt, One Road initiative. And so it will be a counterbalance to that. Some would say that. But as a private sector company, such political or geopolitical areas are not where we want to be involved in. We're looking at areas blessed with solar energy, and we want to play a very positive role in this endeavor where there's a lot of solar energy resources. Why do we do this? We feel that when we think about the future Asia supergrid, I think this sort of thing would play a very important role. And we're doing many things, and people say we are doing many things, and we want to do so going forward. But all is to penetrate natural renewable energy, the Asia supergrid, energy interconnection. Everything feeds into this. That is the intention.
And solar development in Africa. As I said earlier, on the 2nd of July in Mauritania, we met with President Kagame, who's the president of Rwanda. He is also the president of African Union. And the African Union has official targets for Africa by 2030. 300 gigawatt of power to be installed by 2030. 300 gigawatt of renewables are to be introduced. So that's the vision by the African Union. 55 countries, and this is irrelevant. Perhaps is it going to be 55 countries? Is it 54 countries? There's a debate there, but there are 55 countries involved, and they have abundance of solar renewables, and SoftBank would like to proactively engage in that, cooperate with that. This is something where REI is playing an important role, and that's Japan's climate initiative, JCI. From the position of a private sector company, we strongly agree with this. As SBG and SBE, we have become founding members and are making contributions. So come to think about this, and I say this every time I make a presentation on this topic. Renewables, solar PV, we have come to an era where we have to harness that, no doubt there. The proof is in the pudding. I think the times have caught up well with this idea. In this time and day, renewables, solar PV, will redefine, reshape all the activities and businesses that we are conducting. This is an economic selection as well from the viewpoint of a private sector company like us. In this society, IT industry is using so much electricity power, and I often say this. Silicon Valley is in the United States, and IT companies are very active there, and they're using a lot of power, and they're talking about green power renewables. And IT industry actually is the greatest user of power. And it's increasing its electricity use exponentially. So the question for the management, of course, is how to source the cheapest power possible. It's a natural question. So there's renewables, batteries, and interconnections. We need these three elements. And at the risk of misunderstanding, we're now looking at existing systems. So renewables, battery, and interconnections, those are the only three that we need, actually. And power really does not take any cost. It's free of charge. Because input cost is zero. Well, when I say zero, it could cause misunderstanding, but we don't have to pay for the fuel if we're relying on solar power. Of course, in order to set up a plant or grid, a cost has to be incurred, but be it wind or solar, there's no input cost. And if we can connect globally, and if there's time distribution, risk distribution, if we can connect across different regions, it could be beneficial. When there's no wind, when there's no sunlight, what can we do? We can use batteries to store energy. And once such batteries are in place, we can come up with a perfect system. You can intuitively understand that. And that's the kind of world that we should aspire to achieve. That's where we should be heading. We have made investments in natural resources, and you may wonder, what does this have to do with interconnectors or grids? So renewables, natural energy, clean energy is supplied through interconnectors to different parts of the world, and they can become the basis of new industries. Do you remember likening to human body? Well, this grid is the vasculature, the blood vessels, and IT industry is the neurons, if you will, the nerves. That's the analogy I often use. And the times where we rely on oil, fossil fuel are over. So lithium, cobalt, these precious metals are going to be important for technology. And these are going to play a crucial role in supporting the technology that is new in the upcoming society. And this is something that I'm negative about. One Belt, One Road, Son is playing a role in GEICO as executive vice president, and GEICO Global Energy Interconnection Development and Cooperation Organization is also a very important project. Asia Supergrid concept was announced in September 2011. How many years have passed already? I'm left wondering. In the Japanese government, we do not really see a force that is being positive about this. So we have yet to see a force that tries to promote this project. As Dr. Takahashi said, technically it's feasible and the economics are there. So the rest that we need to work out is the rulemaking in politics, laws, and regulations. And our neighbors, Korea and China, well, they're more advanced than Japan, perhaps I should say. Amongst the three countries, SGCC, KEPCO, and SoftBank, the three parties have had discussions, but plainly put, we were the old man out, if you will. We were excluded. SoftBank may be working hard on this, but this project will never work without the national government's blessing. What is the Japanese government doing? What is METI doing? What is ENRI doing? What are the power utilities in Japan doing? What are they thinking? Can they not at least engage in a dialogue? But what happened was in April 2017 and onward, plainly put, the Chinese corporation and KEPCO have given up on us because Japan is making no progress. And so they decided to work with each other, excluding Japan. I think that was the kind of decision that they made back in April 2017. And I'm feeling a great sense of crisis, but then one can do only so much to prevent this, I have to say. And Korea is also working very proactively with Russia to pursue this. And the significance of ASG for Japan, I should not be repeating this so many times, but the most important aspect of this is introduction of renewables and expansion of the use of renewables, energy and national security. From that viewpoint, I think this project is conducive to promoting security and stability, and new services can arise out of this project, in my belief. This is my last page. So how is Japan going to behave in the international community going forward? What is it going to do? As an employee of SoftBank, we would like to continue making steady efforts at international cooperation and to promote interconnectors. We shall continue our efforts. But those of you who are gathered here, who have a sense of awareness, politicians, you're gathered here. And I do understand your positions, METI officials and ministers. I do understand that we may not necessarily be in a position to inform you or to casually, but then is it good for Japan doing nothing at all about this? I think we need to review that, and perhaps action is warranted if we are to consider the benefit of this country. I'm not really sure how useful we're being, but we would, as I said, like to continue making steady efforts on our energy business. Asia and the whole world will be connected through interconnectors. As a result, renewables will be massively introduced and utilized. And that is the goal that we would like to continue working towards. And so if there's any comment, please let me know. I look forward to your advice and counsel. With that, I would like to conclude my brief remarks. Thank you for your attention.
三輪様、ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Mr. Miwa. Next, we'd like to invite Mr. Kapko Park, Assistant Vice President, Power System Planning Department, Head of Supergrid Team, Korea Electric Power Corporation, to give his presentation on the current status and future perspective for Northeast Asia Supergrid. So, Mr. Park, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kapova from KEPCO in Korea, not in Japan. I'm working for the International Power Grid, and especially for Northeast Asia Supergrid project. Today, I'd like to introduce supergrid examples in Europe and the current status of KEPCO regarding the Northeast Asia supergrid. And if you don't mind, I would like to read the manuscript. My presentation consists of four parts: global supergrid cases and intergovernmental cooperation and our challenges. This is the night satellite view of the globe. There are some areas brightly lit up, such as North America, Europe, Asia, and so on. Korea and Japan, even though two countries are completely isolated with respect to power grid, there is no grid interconnection between two countries. Next, I will go through the European interconnection cases. In this part, there used to be power trading between countries, mainly for seasonal peak load sharing. Nowadays, the power trading trend is changing to import and export the clean energy by integrating diverse energy sources. The origin of the supergrid dates back to when America and Canada were connected to share electricity generated by Niagara Falls. Since the 1990s, the northern European countries have actively engaged with such supergrids, leading to global expansion. In Europe, ENSOE has 42 member utilities in 36 countries. There are over 400 regional grid interconnectors promoted by ENSOE and Europe Commission. There are many interconnectors in Europe. The recent trend of governing structure is SPC, and ownership sharing is 50-50. We can take advantage of project financing to hedge the project risks and implement the project efficiently. This is the potential risks in common supergrid project. Here we can see policy, financial, planning and consenting is a much more important factor than operational and technical issues. In Europe countries, we can often find the cross-border interconnection were promoted and implemented by high-level politicians. They established the Joint Committee, Intergovernmental Joint Working Group, and so on. They had a regular meeting and a negotiation for the project as a facilitator. This is a gas pipeline interconnection between Turkey and Greece. Although they had some sort of historical dispute, they signed the MOU, IGA, at the ministers' level and established an intergovernmental energy group so that they could have regular meetings between ministers. At last, they could finally get over and completed the interconnection project in 2015 by constant cooperation. This shows the power grid interconnection between Portugal and Morocco. This project has been started with establishing the Joint Committee of the Prime Ministers in 2015. There was a joint declaration by both ministers in 2016, and they signed the MOU for the joint feasibility study in 2017. The last one is the interconnector between UK and Iceland. This project has started by the suggestion of the UK Prime Ministers in 2015. There was an intergovernmental declaration of the project in 2016 and in progress. For the successful cross-border interconnection, the harmonization of top-down and bottom-up is one of the most important factors. This is the Northeast Asia supergrid concept. What do you imagine? We can expect not only joint development and utilization of renewable energy in Northeast Asia, but also joint strategy for global climate change and environmental pollution. In addition, mutual security and economic community could be achieved by the Northeast Asia supergrid. Since the past, there have been many discussions on the power grid interconnection in Northeast Asia. As a result, the representatives from affiliated companies in South Korea, China, Japan, and Russia gathered in Beijing, China in March 2016. Finally, they signed a joint MOU to cooperate on the research and planning for the interconnected power grid spanning Northeast Asia. Starting in May 2016, around 50 experts from South Korea, China, and Japan researched for 10 months. They concluded that connecting the three countries by submarine cables and transmitting the electricity using HVDC technology. The result of this study is economically feasible and technically possible. At the Eastern Economic Forum held in Vladivostok, Russia in 2017, the promotion of supergrid began in earnest through discussions between Northeast Asian countries. As the first fruit of this effort, at the summit meeting between Korea and China in December last year, we have concluded the MOU on cooperation for the power grid interconnection between Korea and China in both governments and companies respectively. They established the joint working group and kick-off in April. Currently, we are implementing the project. At the summit meeting held in Tokyo in May, President Moon Jae-in also emphasized the joint research cooperation for the Northeast Asia supergrid, especially for Korea and Japan interconnection. Just 1 month ago, we also concluded the MOU for joint development Korea and Russia grid interconnection with both intergovernmental and utility level respectively. For the next step to support the project, we need to business model, regulatory framework, taxation, and power trading mechanisms. Finally, we could find out the most feasible model. At last, this is our future plan for the project implementation. We will kick off the joint feasibility study with the Russian electric utility company in September this year. We will make a considerable effort to carry forward a full-scale business, including various international agreements. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Park.